Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Hey Patrick, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for doing this. I'm excited to talk to you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so we were just talking briefly before we got on, and we're recording in the evening of Monday, January 27th, and we're going to talk about Colombian financial markets. And it would appear that there was a 20-hour trade war between Colombia and the United States. So I don't know. I guess we kind of have to start there. But before we get into that, why don't you tell listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I've seen some memes, some really funny memes about that. Some of them say that it was quite a hard week, right? It's only Monday. It started on yesterday, and we'll get on the details about that, on what happened yesterday, which was crazy, but okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Patrick, again for the invitation. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and where I work at. My name is Jonathan Combeau. I basically advise families, high net worth and ultra high net worth families here in Colombia and in the region. And my background has always been in the financial industry here in Colombia. I've been through a lot of institutions. I've been in the central bank. I've been in JP Morgan here in Colombia, Citibank covering corporate clients, Ultra Finco, which was a local brokerage which was sold to Credit Corp about 5 years ago, Colfondos, which is a local pension fund, and now at Credit Corp, I was leading the private banking unit for Bogota. But right now, I'm trying to develop a new business which covers single family offices and multifamily offices in the country. So that's what I'm doing right now. And I'm happy to be here and share some thoughts on what's happening right now in the country.
Yeah. So I guess let's put the trade war stuff aside for a second and maybe level set. And can you just tell listeners a little bit about like Colombia's economy in general? How are things going? Is it a good time for Colombians, generally speaking, investing, working? How are things economically?
Before I go into that, I have to do like my elevator pitch for Credit Corp so people know what we do. For your audience, which I believe is basically most in the US, let me tell you a little bit about our firm. It's, I think, one of the biggest investment firms in Latin America. We have offices in Miami, Panama, Colombia, Chile, and Peru. So we cover the whole region through those offices. We manage more than 15 billion US dollars for our clients. And basically, we have like different types of businesses that we cover. Corporate clients, we cover retail investors, we cover high net worth individuals, and we also do some investment banking, but that's a business that we're trying to get off here in Colombia and pass it on to our banking leg, which is the BCP, Banco de Crédito del Perú, which I don't know if you know them. Credit Corp it has like a Peruvian background, so it's owned by the Romero family, which is one of the most important families in Peru. And we have a lot of business in Latin America through our holding company, Credit Corp, which is actually listed in the New York Exchange. And I'm on the investment side, but we have banking services, we have pension funds in the region, we have insurance companies, we have banks. So we have it's quite a big enterprise. And just to let you know your audience, our reach and how we can help our clients to navigate the financial systems locally and internationally. So with that pitch in mind, let me tell you a little bit about Colombia. For those who are not actually familiar with the country, Colombia, it's quite big. I mean, Colombia has almost the same number of inhabitants as Spain. The economy actually is quite similar. And what has happened in Colombia over the last couple of years is a phenomenon that it's been going through Latin America quite recently, because our research department made a study on how the countries that we cover, Peru, Chile, Colombia, have changed from a red wine party to a left-right party. So we have Boric in Chile, we have Petro in Colombia, And in Peru, you've seen a lot of changes over the last years. So with this change in the politics, we have seen a lot of flows from our clients going through local assets to international assets, specifically Miami. I mean, that's like a Latin American hub for our clients. And to give you a little bit more details on the amount of money that has been going through from the region to specifically the US, I have some data like right here. So I'm just going to read it because the numbers are quite crazy. Since I'm going to start with the first one, which was Chile, when they changed their president from a right wing to a left wing with Boric, you've seen almost $3 billion outflows out of the country to the US. To give you like this on a perspective, this is almost 10 percentage points of the GDP of Chile. Yeah, that's a lot.
Huge outflows.
It is, yeah. In Peru, over the first 11 months, when they switched the president, we've seen almost $21 billion in outflows to the US, which represents roughly 8.5 percentage points of Peruvians' GDP. And in Colombia, if you look at the numbers, you will think it will be a little bit bigger, but they're not. Over the first 11 months, when we switched the government, we saw almost $11 billion out of Colombia to US. So,
and you think that's a direct reaction to government policies or expected government policies? The leftists came in, they said, I don't know, wealth taxes or, everyone's going to pay their fair share, whatever it is. So high net worth individuals just move their money to Miami. Is that pretty much what happened?
You need to understand what happens, what has happened over, I don't know, the last 50 years in our countries, specifically in Colombia. High net worth individuals are very home biased, right? So they buy local assets, they buy local real estate. So they're quite concentrated to our local currency. In Colombia, you cannot have like a US dollar account. So people are actually not diversified. And when you see a switch on these policies and you see the exchange rate devaluate a lot, people notices and they just enter into panic. Just to give you some numbers, right after the Petro government started, he tweeted some socialist policies about currency controls, and the Colombian peso just devaluated like in a week more than 30%. So when people see this, they realize that they actually need to diversify the portfolio, right? So I think people or high net worth individuals in the country are more conscious about diversification. So they want to have their savings on a hard currency. Not all of it, but a part of them. Yeah. Because before that, it was almost like, 90% exposed to the Colombian peso and just like 10% at the US. So that has been changing over the last couple of years. And now you can see an allocation of about, 30% US dollar and maybe 70% Colombian pesos. So yeah, for our industry, it's been great.
Yeah.
I mean, we have opened a lot of accounts over the last couple of years, but these are not so good news for our country because a high net worth individual who has like an operational company in Colombia has like a dilemma. Like when his company is actually giving the person like high profits, you basically can choose between injecting that capital again into your company to expand it, or just take that profit out of the country and put it on your personal portfolio through dividends. Yep. So what we've seen is that our clients are actually not investing in their companies. They're actually taking out their money out of their companies and moving that savings out of Colombia.
So even though 70% of the portfolio is still Colombian assets, the incremental investment that the high net worth individual in Colombia is making is outside. It's into the dollar portion of the portfolio still.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's a headwind for the Colombian economy, I imagine.
Not really, because people are actually taking money out of the country, and put it on investment portfolios in the US. And people are actually replicating what they are used to in Colombia, which is basically real estate assets. So a lot of Latin American people are buying real estate in Florida.
Yep.
This is why
always though. It's been that way for 20 years. It feels like it goes in waves from which Latin American country is buying at the moment. Like I feel like there was a couple of years Brazilians were buying up all the real estate in Miami. Now I think Venezuela had its time. Maybe now it's Colombians. But,
correct.
Yeah.
But now you see a huge flow from Colombia, Peru, and Chile due to the change in the governments. We've done some research about the size of the GDP compared to Florida, and these numbers are crazy. I mean, they blow my mind when I first saw them. Do you know Miami-Dade, which is like it has a lot of zip codes? It has Brickell, like Miami. Like,
it's got downtown, but it's got a couple of the suburbs too, right? You start at the
correct, yeah. So if you compare only Miami-Dade GDP, that's bigger than Colombian GDP right now.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It is crazy.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at Florida GDP, it's bigger than Mexico.
Florida is such a crazy state when you compare it to like Latin America too, because I bet you if you look at like the populations too, or the amount of college graduates from certain countries, they all flock to Florida. I know there's like Orlando's huge with the Brazilians, which I'm not sure, that's not Miami-Dade, but it's crazy. But it makes sense too. I guess it's close. It's an easy flight. The weather's pretty good. No income tax at the state level.
Everyone speaks Spanish.
Everyone speaks Spanish. Yeah, you can get by. So then tell me then about, because when I was first in Colombia, I heard from investors and people that work financial markets there that the Colombian like high net worth or institutional market was ultra conservative in their investments. Like I would ask somebody, oh, what's the venture capital industry like here? The Colombians don't, good luck pitching that. Like we're still pitching equity in general. Is that still true? Or are these, modern, sophisticated portfolios?
I mean, if you look at the general, like typical high net worth individual, it's quite hard to find some investments in venture capital. And that has a reason, because unlike the US, there has not been any exits in Colombia or in LATAM over the last 20 years. I mean, there's no market for that.
Yeah.
I mean, when people buy, like, I don't know, some startup, and they put money on the side to buy a portion of their equity, who knows when they're going to get their money back. So the exits are actually a headache. That is actually changing right now, because we've seen some interest on LATAM in general, not only Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia as well. They all have some unicorns, but it's not the general rule. So people actually don't invest in that type of asset class. And when you look at the equity side, the local equity side, that market, it's actually dead. I mean, you don't have issuers in Colombia. There has been continuously unlisted companies every year in the Colombian company. We have, I don't know, I can tell you about 20 issuers in the Colombian market, which is nothing compared to
there's no IPOs really, right? I mean, occasionally.
Not really. We haven't seen any. I mean, during my lifetime, I haven't seen one IPO in Colombia.
Okay.
So, and that's because, I mean, we are not like, is not in our DNA. I mean, people actually don't save their wealth into the local into the local equity side. So I don't know if it's an issue of access. I don't know if there are not the right incentives for the companies to just list them in the local exchange, because there are a lot of regulatory requirements that are, I mean, when you look at the pros and cons, it doesn't add up, and companies, they're actually not incentivized to list their share in the local company. What we have seen over the last couple of years is a new phenomenon, which is the Mercado Global Colombiano, which is it translates the global Colombian market. And what we're doing is that we're allowing local people in Colombian pesos to buy shares listed in the US and ETFs as well.
Like a Colombian depository receipt, kind of.
Kind of like that, but like you can actually buy an Apple stock in your local exchange in Colombia.
And it's the same as if you had it on your brokerage in the US. Okay.
It is the same. Actually, we've seen some clients that actually have moved their portfolio in the US to Colombia.
Because they prefer the financial institution in Colombia.
No, because there is a tax incentive.
Okay.
Whatever you sell, I mean, if you sell, I don't know, if you had some Berkshire Hathaway stocks over the last couple of years, you have unrealized capital gains, I don't know, of about 50%. So if you sell that in the US, they're going to tax you, right?
Pay it.
Over that capital tax gain. If you move that position into the Mercado Global Colombiano and you sell it here, it's tax-free.
From the US too? They don't give you an exit tax or anything? They just let you go?
No, nothing. So you can sell that position in Colombia and it's not taxed. So
do you have to be Colombian? So if there's a foreign investor listening to this and he's got a huge capital gain on, say, Apple stock, can he become a Colombian resident, open a brokerage account, and transfer his shares to the Colombian financial institution?
From a fiscal point of view, if that foreign investors change its residency into Colombia and then he becomes like a Colombian taxpayer, he can do that. Definitely.
Interesting.
He can do that because he will be under the laws of the Colombian tax regime. So it's people actually don't know this, but it's quite a huge incentive. And we have seen that market explode like over the last, 18 months. Credit card is one of the biggest player on that specific market. The thing is that you're limited to maybe 23 names, share names in the US. And you're also limited to, I think, maybe 30 ETFs, something like that. But with those names, you basically cover like the main, like the hardest names that people talk about.
Okay.
So if you have like a weird stock, where you have
of course,
like a huge unrealized gains, you cannot do that.
So what then? You mentioned that the Colombian investors, when they go abroad, they like to buy real estate, obviously Miami. But what else? Are they still, Latin American allocators buying U.S. assets? I mean, are they still just buying fixed income too? Or are these flows in the 30% of their portfolio that's outside of Colombia, are those going into Mag 7 and tech stocks and, NASDAQ?
Yeah, so to answer that question, it's quite funny because you need to understand how they work here. So in Colombia, when people like unsophisticated clients invest, they have like two asset classes, which is local term deposits on one side, and real estate. They don't know that in the middle there are a lot of opportunities that maybe they're missing out. So when they take their money out of Colombia into the US, they replicate that. Yeah. And the funny thing is that, they buy their real estate in the US, but when they're trying to buy fixed income, they look for Colombian names. It's funny because they're trying to diversify, but then they end up buying, corporate bonds from Colombian banks.
Because they're comfortable with the names and they feel like they know the business.
Yeah, it's a home bias.
Yep, pure and simple. It's home bias. Yeah. The point of opening the account in Miami is to diversify the Colombia risk. So buying, Bank of Colombia on a U.S. broker doesn't really do it for you.
It's quite funny, but that's the truth.
Okay. Interesting.
I guess that happens with
that part of. So your job is educating the client then and saying, trying to diversify the portfolio properly for them, or because you manage the domestic and the international, I imagine, for your clients.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So that's like the most basic client. You have some highly sophisticated clients that have their single family offices with hundreds of millions of dollars. And they have really like a very sophisticated team that advises them. So those type of clients that are highly sophisticated, they actually understand the risk and they have a quite diversified portfolio. And what I like the most about those clients is that they're trying to replicate a little bit more the successful story of endowment funds in the US, for example. So if you look at them over the last 30 years, they have been allocated a big chunk of their portfolio into alternative assets, right? More than 40%. And we have some Colombian families that actually allocate a lot of their portfolio into alternative assets, and some international advisors sometimes are quite surprised because they see this family that is behaving more like a single family office in the US or Europe. So, I mean, you have the whole spectrum, the basic ones and the more sophisticated ones. And on the alternative asset side, what we're seeing right now, which is, I believe, something similar on what's happening in the US, people are drawn towards private debt because of the high interest. I've seen some appetite as well on infrastructure, Europe and US. The more sophisticated families in Colombia understand that their wealth comes from Colombia. So their risk is Colombia, and whatever portfolio they have outside, their mandate is to basically invest either in the US or Europe. So they don't have any appetite for Latin America whatsoever. This is for the most sophisticated clients.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes sense. But it's interesting because what you mentioned about the Colombians going to the U.S. and looking for Colombian stocks, the next step is to, look next door at a Peruvian stock and say you're diversifying too, right?
Yeah. So as you mentioned before, I mean, my job is actually educate those clients and maybe, but it's quite difficult. I mean, when you have a bias that's in your heart, It's really hard to educate a client. I mean,
it's interesting. It's interesting how the cultural mixes with the finance because, Colombians love Colombia, generally speaking, so they want to invest there. And I can see it. It makes sense. But so what then is this the ultra high net worth market? Like, let's talk more generally, not just, your clients, but what's the market like for ultra high net worth wealth management services in Colombia? I mean, are there a lot of...
Yeah. That's a number that is quite hard to find. I mean, I've seen some reports, but there's not like a specific number because it's not a public. It's not on the public records. But some people estimate that the market is around $50 billion, which has been growing over the last 10 years. I don't know, 1 to 3% growth rate. So the big players in Colombia are basically the local domestic banks. They have a big chunk of that money because of the home bias that I told you about. And we see the usual international banks from US and Europe trying to captivate some of the outflows that I told you at the beginning of the call. So I've seen a lot of, bankers that are based in Miami and New York coming to Bogota a lot, and trying to prospect those families and trying to capture, part of that market share that I told you.
No, I was just curious, what's the typical, source of wealth? Like, what's the breadwinner look like, Colombia? Is it a third generation business that's in industry? Is it an old farm that's been operating for a few generations? What's a ultra high net worth client in Colombia? If there is a generalization you can make.
I mean, you can look at the Forbes magazine and see the top 10 families. They come from finance background. They come from retail. If you look at Colombian wealth, most of our exports are from oil and gas and coal. So you have families related to those industries that are well positioned on the wealth management market. But there's not like a one category that you can tell you, all the families come from this background. Quite diversified. I mean, you cannot put like a label on the families. And in terms of the generation wealth, I will say that it's quite like a young industry. I mean, only seen, I think most of our clients are concentrated on the first and second generation. I mean, not all of our clients have even survived the third generation. Yeah.
Okay. So relatively new. Relatively new wealth. Yeah.
It is new. If you see, I'm going to send you a paper that talks about that, because in Latin America, I was actually writing an article for a book that is going to be published this year about single and multifamily offices in the region. And what we have seen so far is that almost 70% of all single family offices that have been constituted in Latin America, it's only been a couple of decades, over the last 20 years. So it's a quite young industry.
Yeah, it's still Latin America in general. I'd say the professionalization of the financial service is still a little bit behind what you would see in New York City or London, right? So I think a lot of very wealthy families are starting to catch up over the past, 5-10 years to opening a family office and diversifying and having an account in Miami and having an account in London. And
correct.
So, yeah, correct. So that trend should still play out.
We didn't spoke about what happened yesterday.
No, one more before about the portfolio construction. We kind of went backwards, so we're going to go backwards. But I want to ask you, because you mentioned it before we talked. So you talked about you're working with some structured products as it relates to your clients' portfolios. So what's going on with the structured product for foreign investors, or for Colombian investors, rather?
Yeah, since they're not that sophisticated, they basically buy plain vanilla assets, most of them. Some of them actually, they understand the structural notes. But if you look at our portfolio in general, I will believe that our Chilean and Peruvian clients are quite more sophisticated with that asset class, specifically in Colombia. They're not, I think people prefer to, buy a building through private equity instead of buying like an S&P structured note. Yeah,
makes sense.
They can put it in their heads. So it's
I've
quite
noticed
difficult
to call it a tangible asset bias. You can touch
Correct.
it. Yeah.
It's quite difficult for the client to understand that type of asset class. For me, it's quite simple to sell our clients. I don't know, we're going to just lend some money to this company and they're going to pay you back in 3 years. That clicks a little bit. It makes sense in their heads, easier than a structured note that has, capital protection of 10% on the S&P. They don't get that. It's quite difficult. If you add derivatives on the note and it has some leverage, their head just explodes and they don't buy it. So in terms of sophisticated products, I will say that it's quite easier to sell some like private debt, private equity, not that much. In Colombia, we actually issue the first private debt fund in the country, credit card issue. We raised more than, I will say, $350 million from institutional investors. Okay. And we're deploying that capital in Colombia. This is only a Colombian peso denominated risk.
Okay.
Right? So we have been quite successfully putting that risk into the market. And that's what's buying institutional investors right now. I'm trying to sell that for families. I haven't succeeded yet, but for our second fund, which I believe will be issued maybe later on this year, I think there's going to be like a great appetite for that. So, yeah.
Cool. So anything else about, the high net worth or wealth management market in Colombia before we talk a little bit about trade wars and then maybe Colombia's economy in general?
Yeah. Well, it's quite difficult from a foreign investor perspective to invest in Colombia and try to capture the management market, because you see a lot of regulatory and tax complexities. When people try to buy assets here in Colombia, it's quite hard. You need to navigate very well the tax code and all the regulations that go through that. You have to go through the bureaucratic processes of the country itself. Obviously, Colombia, we had a theme of not being the most secure country in the world. Right now that's been changing, specifically for our capital cities. However, if you move to some rural areas, there's still some insecurity that you need to be aware of. So, and again, the Colombian peso, I think, is one of the most volatile currencies in the world. If you compare them to the Mexican peso or the Brazilian real, I will say we are like a one standard deviation away from them on an intraday basis. So I take my hat off from the FX traders here in Colombia because it's crazy. It's so from a foreign investor perspective, when you invest in Colombia and you try to hedge that risk, the currency risk, it is quite expensive. So
I find it so hard too, because when I talk about, Brazilian or Colombian listed names, and it's peso or Brazilian real risk, foreign investors ask me, oh, it's going to go up, but I never know what to tell them over a 2 or 3 year time frame, because most of the risk for them is going to be currency risk, right? Like their risk is the company does fine, and then the Brazilian real tanks 25% like it did last year, and all of a sudden you lost money on a good domestic investment.
So for example, during pandemic and actually over the last 3 years, we have some like real estate funds locally here in Colombia. One of them is actually managed by us in Credit Corp. And right now they're trading at a huge discount. So you can buy the units of that fund maybe at a 50% discount, which is good.
To the asset value, to the real estate that it owns.
To the NAV. Yeah. So when we try to pitch this deal to foreign investors, they look at the numbers, and then when they do the numbers and hedge the currency risk, they end up with an effective rate of maybe, 12% in US dollars. So they tell us that they can have that same level of return with US assets without going into the trouble of buying some, real estate fund in Colombia at a discount.
So how would they typically go about trying to hedge the peso risk then? Are they going to be constantly doing derivative contracts in dollars?
They have to with banks. Right.
They can't just buy gold or buy the dollar with the yield every month or anything. No, they have to actually hedge it with derivatives.
They need to hedge it with derivatives with local or international banks. So they convert their US dollars into Colombian peso, buy the asset, and then sell those pesos into the future.
And like you just mentioned, the peso is volatile and relatively thinly traded, which means it's probably a pretty expensive hedge.
I mean, if you look at the numbers to hedge that risk, it will cost you around maybe between 5 and 6% a year. So yeah, it is expensive. You need to put that into your total return, that cost, that 5-6% cost. So when someone pitch you an investment that is going to give you, like a 20% return in Colombian peso, you need to take out the hedge, which is about 6%. So that will be in US dollars, 14% investment.
Which is still not bad.
It is good. It's not bad.
In today's environment, it's okay. All right. So should we talk about whatever happened last night? I mean, of all the days to do a Colombia podcast, I was watching the news last night before I went to bed. And what are we going to talk about tomorrow? I don't even know. You want to tell me from your perspective, what's going on?
I almost didn't catch like a dream last night. It was crazy. It was a really, really crazy day. I think it could have been like Black Monday for Colombian markets if those two haven't sorted out. So what happened was that Donald Trump basically sent a couple of airplanes to Colombia with illegal immigrants from the US to Colombia, and everything was good. All the authorizations was good. And at 3 a.m. in the morning, Sunday morning, our president tweeted that he was not going to allow that because their situation was not dignified. I don't know what that means. So basically, when Donald Trump heard about this, it basically exploded against President Petro and listed a list of sanctions. And I guess it was a way of telling not only Colombia, but the world what he was going to do if people or governments didn't go the US way, right? And so this happened for almost, maybe 6 hours. And actually, I saw some quotes in the crypto market, devaluation of the Colombian peso of almost 30% in one day. So it was crazy. I don't know what happened. I don't know the specifics, but I think that the Colombian government actually saw the magnitude of those sanctions because it was not only tariffs.
I mean, we have travel booked to go to Colombia in a couple of months, and the tariffs were so serious. We're like do we cancel the trip? I mean, we never cancel the trip, but I read that they were getting kicked off of Visa and MasterCard. You know, they were suspending the consulates, no more visas for Colombians. I mean, it was really heavy stuff.
I had friends that had like a visa appointment today, and they received like a message last night from the U.S. Embassy canceling that appointment. And that appointment, it's crazy to get here, man. It will take you like maybe, I don't know, a year to get that appointment.
To get it for a first appointment.
Yeah.
Which is sad, too. It's kind of counterproductive, thinking out loud speaker, because, you know, you're trying to incentivize legal immigration, and you're going to shut down the people that are waiting politely in line to go about the process the right way, right?
So from a tariffs perspective, the timing could be worst because, as you know, San Valentine days, it's a couple of weeks from now, right? And Colombia, I think, is the biggest exporter of flowers to the U.S., specifically on those dates. And in order for you to grow a flower, it will take you, I don't know, maybe 6-8 months planning.
All that CapEx was spent already. All that money was invested in the flowers. We're just going to die in Colombia.
So everything was like that industry specifically was, I mean, they employ more than 200,000 people, that industry specific. So, it was a big deal because everything was going to just will go down the toilet due to a tweet from our president. So, people don't talk about this, but I will say that was going to be like the most impacted industry, like in the really short term.
Which is a big deal for Colombia's economy, right? Like it's a big export product for Colombia, flowers.
I mean, it's not the biggest, but it is important that
matters.
That industry. So
it would have hurt. It would have hurt, right?
Yeah. So in order of magnitude, you will have oil exports on the first like ranking. I think that represents almost 50% of our exports to the U.S. It's oil. Then you go down to coal, and on the third position is coffee, right? So I think those three were the main industries that were going to be affected. And it was weird because, I mean, Colombia has always been like a good trade partner with the U.S. I mean, we always had like this good relationship. Colombia has always been seen in the region as a stronghold for the U.S. Yeah. I mean, if you look at Latin America, Colombia was one of the last countries that moved from a red wine party to a red wing party, to a left wing party. So, I mean, right now, everything is cool. I mean, we don't see any red flags in the future. This government has 18 months to go, which in reality, it's only 12 months because the last 6 months they're going to be, I don't know, like a presidential campaign. So nothing's going to happen.
One of the things I gathered from this story is it feels like Colombians are not particularly happy with the state of the economy. Is that fair to say? Or is it more that they're not happy with the government and the economy is okay?
The economy is really bad. I mean, we have
people are...
we have a huge fiscal deficit. If you look at Colombian growth compared to our peers, I think we're one of the worst performing economies. Last year, I think we grew less than 2%, something like that, which is crazy for an emerging market country. The money that the government is actually trying to gather from taxes, it's not been what they had expected. So they have fiscal tax issues on that, and that is just a result. I mean, if you have a bad economy, you're not gonna recollect taxes.
Yeah, it's part of the high net worth, like the very wealthy Colombians diversifying out of Colombia. Is that kind of throwing a wrench in the government's tax projections?
I think, that could be one factor. But I think in general, it's just about the uncertainty. I mean, people are not doing anything. They're just waiting to see what's going to happen next year and then decide if they're going to another plan. They're going to buy, I don't know, another company here in Colombia. They're going to buy land to expand their operations. So people are actually just waiting to see what happens. And when that happens, the money doesn't flow into the economy. And everything paralyzes. Yeah, correct.
Because people are that unhappy with the economic policies as they are now that if they don't change, or if there's not signs of change in 12 to 18 months in the election season, then they're just going to send more abroad, right? Then the 30% outside of Colombia goes to 50, something like that.
Correct. Yeah. Funny. It's not funny. It's quite, like an impressive data. I spoke with the CEO of Binance in Colombia.
Yep.
And the whole crypto thing for me, it's quite new. I'm actually learning it. And I asked him, how many accounts do you have in Colombia? And his answer just blew my mind because from a wealth management perspective, you count your accounts in the thousands, right?
Oh.
And he told me that he has more than 3 million accounts in Binance from Colombian residents. I was like, what?
Yep.
It's crazy. And he told me that we are, I think, the 6th largest country for Binance in the world.
Number 6. Colombia always ranks really high for some reason. But Brazil, for example, they have more verified, KYC verified crypto accounts across Binance and then the local accounts like Foxbit, Mercado Bitcoin than the Brazilian equity market. And it's been like that for a few years. So like out of nowhere, it went from nothing to bigger than the Brazilian equity market.
So to put that into perspective, and it's kind of weird because I told you that Colombians residents are quite basics when they look at their investment. And then you see 3 million accounts in Binance. It doesn't add up.
It's like the institutional versus young retail, I think. I think like your 20-year-old Colombian that plays Fortnite or whatever video game has more in common with a 20-year-old in Germany that plays the same game and invests in cryptocurrency than he does with a Colombian institutional investor that's 70 years old. I think that's just a generational gap. I don't know.
I don't know. It is weird, but it's a wave that we as wealth managers need to just put an eye on that because people are actually like.
Yeah, I mean, not to go too deep on crypto, but if you look at some of the ETF flows for the Bitcoin ETFs in the US, I mean, they were the most successful launches of ETFs in US history. Like 6% of all the money this year that's gone into all ETFs in the United States has gone into the Bitcoin ETFs, which is insane.
One of the ETFs that BlackRock has for Bitcoin, which is the IBIT.
Yep.
Was listed on the Mercado Global Colombiano last month, December.
Okay. So Colombian investors can get the ETF.
Right now, with Colombian peso. So I don't think people know about this, but so it's getting some traction. So I was good. I wanted to tell you that because it blew my mind when I spoke with him, and I actually didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them use it. Honestly, it's not necessarily the meme coins, like they get the bad press, but the biggest use case in Latin America has been the stable coins. It's been a tokenized dollar. Like if you talk to an Argentinian, for example, like they've been using Tether, USDT, or USDC Circle, which is a competitor. They've been using it for years. You can do full real estate transactions on crypto rails in Argentina without ever touching the Argentinian banking system because that was a necessity up until recently.
For our countries, it's just a natural hedge for inflation. I mean,
people want dollars. I think that's one of the things people talk about, the BRICS currency, but I think most people in the BRICS country would rather have a dollar.
Correct.
All right. What else I said about Colombia, the trade wars, the high net worth market, anything we should leave investors with? What should they be paying attention to forward?
I think we cover most of it. I mean, we need to take a deep look on what's going to happen on the political landscape. That's going to actually change what investors think. Right now, I think that the local market is quite cheap. So if someone is going to bet on a change on the political side next year, they're going to have like a big return. So not right now, but we haven't seen like huge flows into Colombia. However, there's something that you need to be looking at over the next 18 months in order to maybe, I don't know, see some good opportunities here.
One of the things I feel like I learned, or tell me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like it's really all about the election in Colombia for the markets and equity prices. I mean, I saw somebody post, I don't remember who said it, but it said the irony is Colombian markets are finally going to start going up now because people can start pricing in that Petro is going to lose next year. Like, I don't know how true.
It is a sad affirmation, but I would say it's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So now I think people kind of finally realize he's got a rough go at re-election, and now they can start pricing in what Colombia is going to look like in 2027.
Correct.
Wow.
I mean, after yesterday, the mini trade war that we have with
it didn't go well for Colombia. It didn't go well for him, at least.
No, but I mean, you saw the market, and you will think that the peso was going to devaluate, and it happened the opposite. I mean, people just don't buy it anymore. They just they don't buy the Petro speech anymore. The peso actually revaluated.
His post about the United States is boring and Trump's oil is going to destroy the world. It was very strange. It was, sometimes I follow Latin American markets for over a decade, and sometimes I just shake my head and I'm just going to close the screen. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do with it. And I read that and I said, I don't know. It's Sunday night, but awesome. John, this was really interesting. We'll have to do this again, but where can listeners find you on the internet, follow you, reach out, learn more?
Just look me up on LinkedIn under my name, and just give me a hi. I'm very active on that social network, so you can just reach me there, and happy to share some thoughts on Colombia and the wealth management market. Cool.
I will link your profile in the show notes so people can find you easily if you're listening. Thanks again for doing this, Jonathan. It's a pleasure.
All right, Patrick. Thank you very much.